The NFL is without question the best live entertainment you can get. And when it's not on the field, when some of these quarterback and wide receiver series, right now it's the NFLPA and everything they have going on, from Lloyd Howell and JC Treader to questions about legality, confidentiality, and everything in between. One of the lead writers for ESPN that has helped break these stories, Kalyn Kahler, joins Neil and I today to talk about all things NFLPA, what we know, what we can maybe guess, and what to expect as we go forward here on Scouting the League. Everybody, and welcome to Scouting the League. Big show today with Kalyn Kahler, senior writer over at ESPN for the NFL. Friend of the program, Kalyn will take us through everything she knows, everything that's been reported, as well as give us a little more insight to the process and all that's gone into it. But before we jump in with Kalyn, let me remind you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast wherever you are listening, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our video portion over on YouTube. Give us a follow, subscribe wherever you're at, and of course, share this with a friend. Going to get some insight today. Maybe you can't read the full article. Maybe you just don't have time. Want to throw on the audio portion here as you're driving somewhere. Make sure you share it with a friend and let them know to do the same. Again, give us some likes and subscribes and follow us wherever you're at. I, of course, am Rodrik David, former NFL scout, spent time in pro, spent time in college, continuing to bring you everything you need to know from the scouting side of the league. Neil Stratton, of course, he is at Inside the League, InsideTheLeague.com. Neil helped all those agents get through the NFL agent exam and into some hot water as all things are hot in the NFL this time of year. And of course, Kalyn Kahler, she is at Kalyn Kahler. Check those show notes for where you can follow her. It's been an awesome addition to Scouting the League, as we have had her in the past, and someone I've known since, again, about 2019 when I was out on the road in the Midwest, and I believe she was with Yahoo Sports at the time. But we will jump in here with Kalyn, but again, we will plan on seeing you next week at the recruiting and personnel symposium in Nashville. Come find both Neil and I there. Scouts, aspiring scouts, check out thescoutingcommunity.com, as well as check out every episode of our now daily podcast wherever you can find it, and check out our host, profootballinsiders.com. Check them out on X at pro_FB_insiders. There we go, pro_FB_insiders. But with that, let's get to Kalyn. Kalyn Kahler, welcome back to Scouting the League.
Thanks, Rodrik. And
Kalyn, I think you joined ESPN since last time we spoke. Congratulations on that. You've done some fabulous reporting already, especially kind of what brings you here today on the events that ultimately led to the downfall of Lloyd Howell as the executive director of the NFLPA. Shocking development, in my estimation. Certainly something that kind of was a little slow at first and then really became bigger and bigger. When did this investigation start, and what prompted you all to even kind of look in his direction, Kalyn?
Yeah, so I have to give credit to Pablo Torre. Pablo Torre Finds Out. He has a podcast and a show, and he, along with Mike Florio, they worked together to get the collusion grievance decision, the 61-page decision that we, up until that point, had never seen and really hadn't heard that much about, other than the PA lost that grievance. I think that was the only thing that was known. And I actually was so mad it ruined my entire week, because I had been kind of asking around about it, but not trying very hard to get it, just sort of checking in with people, and nobody seemed to know anything about it. And I was like, all right, well, maybe it didn't result in any type of physical paper that we can read. Maybe there wasn't something that the arbitrator actually wrote down. So I sort of forgot about it and went on vacation. And then Pablo got it. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm so glad he got it. I'm so glad we can read it. But I was so mad journalistically, from a competitor standpoint. I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. And so I ended up writing about, what was in that decision. And then from there, Don Van Natta and I teamed up, because he'd heard a few things, and he was like, hey, I saw that you had kind of written about this before. Why don't we work together? because he works for our investigative team, whereas like I work for the NFL side. So I'm like more sourced with players and, I had a few union sources. He had a bunch of union sources as well, because he's done a lot of CBA reporting, Dan Snyder reporting, things like that. So we teamed up and we were able to do, I think we've done like 6 stories now at this point, something like that, 5 or 6, because it was just like little thing. The first thing we wrote about was the existence of this confidentiality agreement where the PA agreed with the league, both parties agreed to keep this decision private and confidential from the public, from the NFL players, even from the players executive committee, which is supposedly the group that is supposed to be, it's the group that's supposedly supposed to be running the union. Like the executive director should be reporting to the executive committee. He reports to the player. The players are his boss. But in this case, the executive committee didn't even know that the union, that Howell had entered into this confidentiality agreement with the league. And so we thought that was pretty interesting and sort of a departure from what normally happens. So that was our first story. Then we did some reporting about how Lloyd Howell was a part-time consultant for a private equity firm, which was known among the players. The players knew this. People in the union staff knew it. Lloyd himself actually said it at the Super Bowl press conference that I was sitting in, and it went totally over my head. I think I was not paying attention, but also I wouldn't have known what the Carlyle Group was. So I would have had to Google that and be like, what is this? I didn't have the name recognition for that. So I didn't even realize that at the time, but this was like something that was known about him. This was not hidden, but we ended up reporting that within the union, like he'd been asked to resign from that position once the Carlyle Group had been approved to invest in NFL clubs, because that feels like a very obvious conflict of interest. And he did not resign from that position. He was still doing both jobs. So we did that reporting. And what's interesting about that one is that the players actually, the ones that I spoke to a player rep who told me, yeah, well, we knew about that. And like, we actually think it's a positive. Like they felt it was a good thing that their union director could be on both sides of the equation, that he was not just their union director, but he also could be like an NFL owner and possibly be partially an NFL owner someday, which is just, it's so different than how I think the conventional thinking about a union is. And everybody we spoke to who are like labor management, experts, people have been working in this area for a long time. We're just like, we talked to Jim Quinn, who was the outside counsel for the PA for years. He was totally scandalized by the fact that Lloyd was a part-time paid consultant for a private equity firm that is approved to invest in NFL clubs. Mm-hmm. So we reported on that. Then we reported on the fact that Lloyd had at least two incidents where he charged strip club expenses to the union, one in Atlanta and one for a car service that took him to a strip club in Miami. And that was also a lot of gossip about him in the union office. And so we reported that, and he actually resigned the night before that story came out. And we know that he had gotten wind that we were working on that. Like he knew we were working on that. And so that may have played a part in him resigning. And then Pablo got another grievance, the running back grievance, that also did not get released to the public, and involved J.C. Treader, who then resigned shortly after Lloyd 2 days later. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been just like a steady drip of information. And if Pablo had not gotten that collusion grievance, I don't think any of this reporting would have happened, because nobody was really asking questions about Lloyd until that grievance comes out. And it's so interesting and it's so important. And I've talked to many agents who have read the 61 pages and said, yeah, I wish I would have known some of this stuff for the last free agency period. Like there's stuff in there about how the owners are talking to each other, about how the league's management council is talking to owners, that would have been useful and interesting for veterans and agents who are negotiating contracts in the last free agency period. And that decision came out in January. So they could have shared it in January and it would have possibly made a difference in this last free agency period.
Kalyn, I know you don't cover the other sports. You're a football person. But can you imagine any of the major labor leaders in any of the other 3 majors entering into a confidentiality agreement that goes completely at cross purposes to the interests of the members of their respective unions?
I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the leaders of the other unions to know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with their dynamics to know if that would happen or not. But I will say, there are reasons, logical, valid reasons that you may do this. Mostly centered around legal conflicts, and that's what that is what I've heard from a player rep and from another union source as to why this confidentiality agreement was entered into. And so I will say the PA on the record has not told us anything about why they did this. We've had no official statement from them. They haven't given any statement on the record. But I've now heard from a player rep since we reported about it. I've heard from a player rep and another union source that the reason for the confidentiality agreement was to protect the information of the three quarterbacks who the grievance was centered around: Kyler, Lamar, and Russell. And Lamar and Russell, in that decision, I don't think Kyler had any messages in there that I remember, but Lamar and Russell had personal messages, text messages or emails in the grievance decision. And so to get the quarterbacks comfortable with turning over their phones to be searched, what I was told is the union said to them, well, we're going to do as much as we can to protect your information from being public. We're going to keep it private and confidential as best we can. So that meant when the decision came out, they needed to redact everything. And they needed to redact the owners' names and the club's names and the quarterbacks' names. And then there's just not a lot left in that document. It's a lot less powerful without the specific information. So that was part of the reason I was given about that. And I was like, okay, that actually, it does make sense. I don't know if that's the full reason. And then I was also told it was because they weren't sure if they were going to appeal or not. And so before they wanted anyone to know what was in the decision, they wanted to decide if they were going to appeal. Now, I don't know why it takes 6 months to decide if you're going to appeal. And the players I've talked to have all agreed that that went on for way too long. And there was definitely frustration among player reps that it took 6 months to decide to appeal that decision, and that they only did it after the decision was leaked. But the way it was explained to me is well, yeah, once the decision was leaked, well, then everybody's privacy is out the door anyways. So now you can appeal because the information's already out there. So I don't know. I don't know what to think of that. I don't know if I think that's 100% the full explanation. It does make sense on some parts of yeah, nobody wants their phone searched. Nobody wants their private text messages being published. So, and the union's job is to protect the players. So maybe they felt like their top priority is to protect the quarterbacks. But ironically, by protecting the quarterbacks, they end up hurting the rest of the membership who probably wanted and could have used the information.
Well, you did a great job playing devil's advocate. It seems counterintuitive at the least that he would kind of enter into something like that with the owners. They're supposed to be the enemy, all those kind of things. And we're still a long ways away from 2031, the next CBA bargaining, but it's still such a fundamental, I don't know, differing from what I would have expected. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the hiring process. Do you think there were red flags that were missed? Do you think, in hindsight, that there are reasons that maybe Howell should have had greater scrutiny among the executive committee and the board?
Yeah, I do. And again, the players, JC Treader said, so there were a few things in Lloyd's background that are definitely red flags. One was he had a sexual discrimination and retaliation lawsuit filed against him and other Booz Allen executives. There were 4 executives total, and he was one of them, in 2011. The next, and that was settled for an undisclosed amount. We tried to get information on that, but no one was talking. So we don't know what that settled for, but it was settled. And then he also was part of this whistleblower civil lawsuit that resulted in a huge fine, or a huge settlement payment from Booz Allen, his employer, to the federal government for basically overcharging the government. And Lloyd's role in that one was that he, per the whistleblower, when she went to him, he was the CFO at the time, when she went to him with her concerns with what she'd uncovered, he said, that's not going to be a priority for us to like fix the problem, essentially. Right. So that was his role in that one, is that he shut down her attempts to fix the overcharging that was going on. Now, the players say, J.C. Tretter said, the players were aware of the sexual discrimination and retaliation lawsuit. And he pulled out his notes. I wasn't with him in person, but on the phone, he got his notes out and he read to me a question that he asked Lloyd about it. What can you tell us about this lawsuit, essentially, with all of the player reps in the room at the election? But then he couldn't remember what Lloyd's answer was. So I don't know how Lloyd answered that in a satisfactory way to make the players feel better about that. But somehow he did, because they ended up voting for him. And then with the whistleblower, with his involvement there, at the time, the settlement was not reached. So the players did know that there was this civil complaint going on. But what I've heard from talking to people who were in the room that day is that he said to them, well, something I'm paraphrasing based off of what the players told me, what they remember, but it was basically like, well, I didn't create this problem. Like, it wasn't my formula or whatever. Like, I wasn't the one who started the overcharging of the government. Like, I'd only gotten into that job, a couple months before it was brought to my attention. Like, I had really nothing to do with it, because he was transferred over from a different area of the company. So that's how he satisfied the players on that count as well. And then he had another strip club incident with Booz Allen, but the players did not know about that. Mm-hmm. So they were briefed on some things that should have been red flags. And Lloyd was somehow able to explain to them why it was okay and didn't matter. But when I talked to JC, I asked him a couple times, like, how, I was trying to say, and we don't really know the other candidate, David White, who was the executive director of SAG-AFTRA, had a lot of experience leading a giant union. He played quarterback at a Division III college. So had a little bit of football background as well. I have not done a background check on him, so I cannot say what is in his background, if he had anything similar, if he's ever been sued in a similar manner, or had any questionable things come up with his last job. So I can't speak to that. And I kept trying to find that out. But my impression from talking to a couple players was that they didn't remember anything like that with the other candidate. So it's really interesting how Lloyd Howell was able to win and decide. He won decidedly. It wasn't even a close vote, like, among the player reps. JC wouldn't tell me the vote count, but he said it was not close. Like, it was not a slim margin.
CBS Sports is reporting, correct me if I'm wrong, that the executive committee voted by 10-1 for White, and the board overruled that.
So, the executive committee's votes don't count. That was just, they don't actually vote.
I understand that.
So,
that's decisive, though. One would think that would totally enter into the decision-making process.
Well, and it should, I think, if there's one thing they could have done differently, the executive committee could have issued a recommendation to the board, but they chose not to. They said, they didn't issue, and they did not take any sides. And they decided if a player asked, they weren't going to do it. But also they weren't asked in the process. So the executive committee, although they were heavily in favor of David White, they were never asked by the player reps who they favored, and they weren't going to say it anyways, because they had made a decision jointly. JC Tretter told me that they didn't want to share their opinion, because they really wanted this to be an executive director that the players chose and nobody else. And that even included, even though the executive committee is players, they didn't feel like they wanted to impose their will, because the way JC Tretter explains it is, even though they were like heavily in favor of David White, they loved both candidates. They were comfortable with either finalist. He's like, we wouldn't have brought Lloyd to the membership, to the Board of Representatives, if we didn't feel good about him being elected. So JC was like, yeah, was I surprised? Of course I was surprised, because I thought it was going to go the other way, but we were fully behind him. And he said he had players tell him afterwards, like, oh, we had no idea that you guys, when they found out later that the executive committee had voted heavily in favor of David White, a player rep told him, oh, we would have never known, because you guys were so neutral, straight down the middle, like, didn't take any sides. And I actually asked JC, in hindsight, like, do you wish Like, do you wish you would have taken his side now that we see how this panned out? And he was like, yeah, well, you know, we did debate that. And he didn't really say like yes or no, but he still defends the election process that they had, like, very staunchly, like, because he really feels like their previous elections, when the players had 2 weeks to know who the finalists were that they would be voting on, he feels like that led to leaks of the candidates' names to the media, and then the media is influencing the election, and then agents are influencing the election, and all of these outside forces that are not NFL players are influencing the election. And he and the the executive committee and the board of representatives, because they had to vote to change the Constitution to change this election process, they all agreed that it would be best, if they wanted to get the best candidate, that they needed to protect the candidate's identity, and they didn't want anyone to influence this election process except for players. So in that sense, they ran the election they wanted to have. Like, they ran the perfect election by that criteria. Now, it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do going forward, because that's what they're talking about right now. The Board of Representatives have been meeting a lot over the last couple weeks to not only discuss the interim candidate, but also to discuss what is the process for the next election. Like, will the interim lead that? Do they want to hire a search firm again? What's the do they want to do the same thing with the confidentiality, where the player representatives don't find out who they're voting for until like the day before the election? So I don't know. I've tried to get a better handle of like what they're thinking in terms of the election process, but I haven't really learned anything substantial there yet. And I know the last I heard about the interim director, what progress they were in a few days ago, it was like they're waiting for their background checks to come through on the candidates. So they were sort of at a standstill on that front. But yeah, Don and I reported on Friday. There was a strange document that was sent out to the player representatives and the executive committee. It was about 3 or 4, it looked like a PowerPoint, like 3 or 4 slides on like official like NFLPA logo. And it was laying out potential criminality and all of the risks, legal risks, criminal action risks that the union is under right now. And it didn't say it didn't definitively say anyone specific is under investigation or that the union is in fact under investigation, but it just laid out, hey, we are at risk for being fined for this. Like, you know, we're being looked at on all these fronts. And it laid all that out. And then it laid out 5 different interim candidates and, you know, what people should do next. And it was not signed by the person who wrote it. So it was sort of like this anonymous document that was sent out. So that's interesting. And I was talking to a player who received that document, and he was telling me that there's been a lot of unsourced information circulating, and that a lot of the players, like, antennas are up. They don't know what to think right now, because especially with JC Treader, like, JC resigned Sunday. I think Florio maybe posted the memo that was circulating about JC. I don't know. Someone did. I saw it somewhere. But there was like this anonymous memo about JC circulating over the weekend before he resigned, like warning players, do not elect him as the interim because XYZ, like laying out all these things that he'd been part of or like allegedly been part of. So that was kind of strange. And so I think like among the player representatives and the executive committee, like there's this sense of like, they don't know what to think right now, because within the union staff, there are some weird things going on with like unsourced information being put out there.
Okay, now, Kalyn, I think you're referring to the one team partnership with Major League Baseball, correct me if I'm wrong, that is perhaps subject to some criminal investigation now, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Can you give us a little bit more about the substance there and what's going on? And I presume that may be where you're training your eyes next. I don't know.
Personally, like Don has been working on a one team story for a little bit with Jeff Passan, who covers baseball for us, because the MLB Players Association is also like directly involved in that one. Cause it's like, I believe it's the MLB Players Association, NFL Players Association. Is it Is the NBA? I don't know if the NBA is part of that.
I think it's just the two, is my understanding.
Okay, it's just the two. Okay. So he's been doing reporting on that. I actually don't like have a great understanding of that, but it's essentially about like if union officials like took money improperly from the terms of that agreement. Mm-hmm. I don't know for sure, but like what Don and I reported Friday, I'm just pulling up the story so I can characterize it properly. We reported about a document, which I was referencing, that said the union is now on notice of financial actions that may be criminal. And that was a quote from the document, and that the union faces, quote, immediate threats requiring prompt actions. And so it has like a few bullet points, and under the bulleted immediate threats, the memo cites potential action by the NLRB board over unfair labor practices and a lapse of fiduciary duty oversight practices during Howell's tenure. Another interesting thing, and it doesn't specify if any individuals are under investigation, criminal investigation, and JC told us he is not under investigation. Lloyd Howell has not responded to any of my calls or texts recently, so we're not sure, what he would have to say in response to this. But yeah, the One Team Partners is the FBI is currently investigating financial dealings involving One Team Partners, which is a group licensing firm by the NFLPA and MLBPA, which it monetizes athletes' NIL, essentially. Mm-hmm. And Lloyd Howell and the MLBPA union director, Tony Clark, have board seats, or Howell did have a board seat. Sure. I believe he no longer does since he's not the executive director. Mm-hmm. But that's been going on this whole time. And then on top of that, a few players on the executive committee of the players union hired a lawyer. I'm like losing track of the timeline now, but probably 2 weeks ago, before Lloyd resigned, they hired a lawyer to do an independent investigation mm-hmm. into Lloyd's actions. And that was mainly based in the One Team stuff. Okay. So they hired the lawyer to mainly look into One Team, but then as that was happening, more of this stuff is coming out of, other things Lloyd was doing. So
isn't this the role of Russell Reynolds, is to find all this information? And do you feel like NFLPA officials are satisfied with the job that Russell Reynolds did? And we're speaking of the search firm that assisted in the vetting of.
Well, I know JC Treader is satisfied with the work that Russell Reynolds did. And even now, like he still thinks they did a good job. And technically they did do their job. Like the only thing that we've reported that the players did not know about was Lloyd's past strip club expense incident at Booz Allen, which we had sources tell us a colleague of his who actually did the expense, who expensed it, was then fired, and Lloyd was reprimanded because he was there, but he wasn't the one who actually submitted the expense report. Mm-hmm. So that was what the players didn't know, but they did know about his corporate board work. They knew about his work with Carlyle Group. They knew about his sexual discrimination and retaliation lawsuit. They knew as much as they probably could have known about his involvement at the time in the whistleblower. I mean, I'm sure they could have known more, but Russell Reynolds, I believe, uncovered most of this. It's just, at what point the executive committee served as a filter, right? So the player reps didn't know until there were 2 finalists left. They only got 2 choices. And JC told me actually most search firms will recommend you just present one choice to your board, and then the board votes if they like that one person or not. Mm-hmm. And JC said, no, we're not doing that. I feel like the executive board felt strongly that they wanted to present actual choices to the player representatives. So they brought 2 candidates, 2 finalists to the player reps. So if JC thinks Russell Reynolds did a good job, then I don't know. It's sort of like, did the union, it falls back a little bit on union lawyers. And because an executive committee member told us that they talked to their union lawyers and the lawyers for Booz Allen about the issues that Lloyd had at Booz Allen, the 2 lawsuits he had there. So if the lawyers are telling the players there's nothing to see here, which is apparently what happened because they were given a green light to go forward with Howell as a finalist. I don't know who's at blame here, because the executive committee serves as a filter to the player reps. So the player reps weren't ever going to get all of the information that the executive committee had, because the executive committee was doing round after round of interviews with these guys. They were really in the thick of it. They were talking to all the finalists, seeing them face to face, and the player reps only get the two who are left standing at the end. And like the executive committee member told us, union lawyers and Booz Allen lawyers, they talked to them about this, and they felt they were given a go-ahead, essentially, to continue with Lloyd as a finalist. So at some point, someone has to say absolutely not, and nobody did.
Did Howell leave Booz Allen of his own, or was he asked to leave? Or is that determination?
Yeah, that's like a gray area. We did some reporting on that, but didn't have enough to go forward with saying anything more. But he did. The timeline is interesting, right? Like, he leaves Booz Allen after like 30 years working there. That might not be the exact number, but it was a long time that he was working there.
Sure.
He leaves in December of 2022. The settlement was reached in July of 2023. The DOJ announced that settlement in July 2023, which is 1 month after he was elected the union director. So the timeline is interesting because, I mean, obviously, if you worked somewhere for that long, I mean, anyone could leave. What players told us is that Lloyd said he wanted a new challenge. He was ready for a new challenge. Sure. So players were not told he left because of the whistleblower lawsuit. Mm-hmm. He told them, I wanted a new challenge. So
I don't want to, take
that for what you will.
And I don't want to get too far in the weeds on his personal situation, but we've also learned that I think his wife filed for divorce shortly before he accepted the job, and ultimately wound up taking about half of his retirement package from Booz, I think, has been reported.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it just seems the picture that emerges is a man who's supremely talented and has accomplished a lot of things, but seems to be in crisis heading into this new role. And that just seems like, boy, I don't know, a lot of rope that they've got to give someone to bring him in. Especially, my understanding is that Russell Reynolds solicited him rather than him coming and expressing initial interest in it. That may differ from the research that you've heard, but
I don't know specifically. I don't remember specifically if we knew whether he was recruited or not. I do know David White was recruited for sure, the other candidate, and I know Russell Reynolds did a lot of recruiting, and that's why I think the union, they hired Russell Reynolds. The players wanted someone different. They wanted someone from outside where they were going to find someone. They wanted the best of the best, the cream of the crop, and they wanted someone who was not like an internal candidate. And they had several former players interview, like Matt Schaub, Dominique Foxworth, and those guys didn't make it very far. So they just really were attracted to, for whatever reason, they were attracted to someone who was from the outside, who could really, and Lloyd's appeal to them was he presented the union's finances and showed them where they were leaving money on the table and showed them how they could make more money and sort of told them, like, this is what a player rep told me, what he remembered Lloyd saying is, I spent my career fighting against unions. So I'm going to be the best leader because I know the tactics. I'm going to be able to fight back. And because I know what they're doing. And also I've been in the world that the owners are living in. Like, that was my world for a long time. So I know them, I can speak to them. Mm-hmm. And that was a big appeal to the players. And even as I've been at training camps recently, I've been talking to players, and like, when Lloyd was resigning, the executive committee did not want him to resign. They were asking him to stay in the job. They did not want him to leave. Mm-hmm. And even the player reps I've spoken to really liked Lloyd. Like, there was from a player perspective, until our reporting started coming out, there was no ill will towards Lloyd. Like, everybody thought he was a good leader. Everybody that I've talked to so far, They liked his platform. They liked that he was going to get the money. And like, I've heard this from at least 2 player reps, and it's almost the exact same sentiment. So I feel like, so it seems like this is and they've told me this is what Lloyd was saying to them, is like, do we really care about smoking more marijuana, or do we care about getting percentage points of revenue? Like, what's more important? And honestly, that makes sense. Like, yeah, what is more important?
Possible. You're right.
You know, like player reps, it's funny, like one of their main functions is like to warn their teammates when to stop smoking weed. Like that's like one of the main jobs of a player rep.
Oh yeah.
Is to be like, guys, the window's closed. Your drug test is coming. Yeah, agents as well. Right.
Ironically, it's April 20th, 420, but yeah, that's neither here nor there.
So
we know you have to go, Kalyn, and we've kept you for a long time. I just want to finish up. Where does the NFLPA go from here, in your estimation, Kalyn?
Well, I mean, practically speaking,
they've got to find an interim director.
They need to find an interim director, decide on their election process.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the one team lawsuit, or the one team federal probe, it's not a lawsuit, federal probe will continue. We'll see what it turns up. I believe the independent investigation that the independent lawyer that the players hired at the PA will be ongoing. That investigation, even though Lloyd is gone, I believe they're still going to look into everything. But they need to get someone, they need to get a director soon, because even though that CBA feels far off, they're going to start negotiating that in 2 years. Like that's going to start, that process will start. And so they need to get an interim in. They need to figure out what their next election process is. And they need to get that ball rolling now, like soon. And this couldn't have happened probably at a worse time for players, because everyone's in training camp trying to make the roster right now. So it's been tough timing wise for them. But I've talked to a couple players that have said, you know, they've got a lot of work to do as far as gaining trust back with the union among players, which has always been an issue the union has had. But I think now they were kind of in a good spot, because Lloyd Howell, I was told, actually did a good job of outreach to quarterbacks, like star quarterbacks, getting them interested in the union. And Patrick Mahomes was a big voice on the call after Lloyd resigned, we were told by people on the call. So that's a good thing if those quarterbacks will stay involved and invested in the union. But a couple of the reps I've talked to have said they feel like the trust within the union right now is not in a great spot, obviously.
No bigger than Patrick Mahomes to get invested in this and really get behind it, and certainly would, I think, it'd be a big net positive for the NFLPA and for all the players if that does take shape. Thanks so much, Kalyn, for your time with us. Your reporting has been out of sight on all this, and we look forward to even more. If you haven't been reading Kalyn, make sure you are. Everything she reads is outstanding, 5 stars. I've been saying that for a long time. Rodrik agrees.
Yep.
A lot of fans across the league. Make sure that you're keeping.
And I use ITL for a lot of my stats and research.
Thanks for the plug. That wasn't necessary, but we appreciate it.
No, but I really do. You know I do, and I love it.
All right.
Awesome. Well, make sure you check her out, follow her if you're not already. She is at Kalyn Kahler. Every story out there. And Kalyn, we appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Rodrik and Neil.
Agents, before we go, make sure you go check out Agent Live 360. It is at agentlive360.com for everything you need for your agency, from players to coaches, managing profiles, tracking invoices, sending invoices, getting paid, keeping up on every element of your entire agency. Notification emails, file folder storage, ROI, transactions, invoices, calendar, contracts, teams, reps, everything all in one spot for you. That is Agent Live 360. Hop on, request a demo. Yours truly will hop on, walk you through it. I can promise you we will talk some football as well. Sign up now with code TRIAL90 for a 90-day, 3-month trial at just $10 a month for Agent Live 360. That's at agentlive360.com. Go check it out now.